All right, y'all. So quite a bit has happened vis-a-vis Israel domestically. Chuck Schumer came out the other day and gave a speech on the floor of the Senate and basically said, look, man, Netanyahu's got to go. He's got to go. He's gone too far. It's unacceptable. And what he's doing is bad for Israel in particular. And, we want him to step down, basically. Now, look, I have to admit my take on this is a little bleak, a little pessimistic. I'm of the opinion that it's mostly just putting on a show, right? Because if you actually want to stop him from doing what he's doing, the total destruction of Gaza, then you cut off the money, you cut off the weapons, you condemn him at the UN, and you threaten the sanctions. Like, that's the first thing you do. Obviously, that's the first thing you do. But they're not doing that, which leads me to believe there's a little bit of a wink and a nod behind the scenes. Hey, look, for our own political purposes, we're going to have to kind of throw you under the bus in terms of our rhetoric in the U.S., but, you still have our blessing and the green light, et cetera, et cetera. We think if we put on enough of a show, we can deflect, blame and obfuscate enough where we'll be okay in the upcoming election. That's my reading of the situation. Now, of course, the media is not going to have the same view of it as me. They take all these politicians at face value. They look at it and think, oh, look, Schumer's really standing up to Netanyahu. Schumer's really standing up to Israel. I mean, I just don't think that's the case. I think it's kabuki theater, and I think Netanyahu's in on it. Now, having said that, he's going to get grilled here on CNN from Dana Bash, so I'm a little surprised by. And he does get kind of heated. He does fume a little bit here. And there's a lot to break down in this. Let's just say it is a massive lie fest, but I'm here to set the record straight. Let's go.
Here with me now is Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Thank you so much for joining me. Let's start with that potential deal, sir. 100 hostages are still being held by Hamas. You're sending that negotiating team to Qatar in the coming days to talk about a potential deal, free hostages in exchange for a 6-week pause in fighting. As you know, Hamas is demanding the release of hundreds of Palestinian prisoners in exchange for roughly 40 female hostages. Are you open to that? Are you close to a deal?
Well, time will tell, but Hamas's outlandish demands, and I'm not itemizing every one of them now, makes that deal a lot more difficult, but
Hamas's main demand is a permanent ceasefire, which is like the most obvious thing in the world, and everybody should agree to. That, hey, we'll do a deal here, but then you have to stop the wholesale destruction of all of Gaza. I mean, they shouldn't do the wholesale destruction anyway. But if it comes in part of a deal where it's like, here, the rest of the hostages. Okay, great. I don't want to have anybody with hostages. But remember, there's thousands of Palestinian hostages, and they're only talking about releasing hundreds of them, not all of them. Right? So my take is release all of the Israeli hostages, release all the Palestinian hostages, permanent ceasefire. That's the bare minimum shit for a deal. But they're insisting on only a 6-week pause. Only a 6-week pause, and you go right back to genocide and ethnic cleansing? Why the fuck would anybody agree to that?
keep on trying because we want those hostages back. We understand also that the one thing that gets Hamas to give them is to give these hostages to us is the continued military pressure that we're applying there. So we're going to continue military pressure, and we're going to continue to try to get those hostages out. And we've succeeded already in bringing half of them out. I hope we continue along that same course.
Let's talk about.
They've also succeeding in killing a bunch of them with their relentless bombing. Remember that? How you've killed a bunch of your hostages? Remember when you, the IDF shot your hostages dead when they escaped and they were waving a white flag? Remember that? I do.
What happened here in the U.S. this week, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer gave a pivotal speech and said, you have lost your way, and called you an obstacle to peace. Take a listen.
The Netanyahu coalition no longer fits the needs of Israel after October 7th. And I believe that holding a new election, once the war starts to wind down, would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision for the post-war future.
By the way, also, once the war starts to wind down, well, then that's a green light to just continue the war in perpetuity. If he knows the second the war's over, I'm no longer prime minister, even from a just political careerist perspective, he's going to want to keep the war going. Jesus Christ, it's all so bleak.
Chuck Schumer is the highest-ranking Jewish elected official here in America, a staunch supporter of Israel. What's your response?
I think what he said is totally inappropriate. It's inappropriate for to go to a sister democracy and try to replace the elected leadership there. That's something that the Israeli public does on its own, and we're not a banana republic. I think the only government that we should be working on to bring down now is the terrorist tyranny in Gaza, the Hamas tyranny that murdered over...
Literally every answer is just Hamas, Hamas. Every answer is just scream Hamas into the ether.
1,000 Israelis, including some dozens of Americans, and is holding Americans and Israelis hostage. That's what we should be focused on. And as far as what Senator Schumer said, the majority of Israelis support our governments. 82% of Americans support Israel instead of Hamas, but the majority of Israelis support the policies that we're leading.
Majority of Americans support Israel instead of Hamas. Yeah, well, when you put it like that, everybody's going to answer that way, right? By the way, he's deeply unpopular in Israel. He is. And he's deeply unpopular in the U.S. That's just true. But he's actually right about the war stuff when he acts like, no, they actually want, if anything, they want us to do the war harder. That's actually true. There was a poll that came out like 2 months into it or whatever, and only like 3% of the public said the IDF went too far in their military response. That is terrifying. And that we have to acknowledge that reality, that the population, even though they're anti-Netanyahu, they are pro this war. Because by the way, just like the U.S. after 9/11, well, the U.S. after 9/11 was both pro-Bush and pro the wars, but they're anti-Netanyahu but pro the war. So we need to understand that is a fact. That is a fact. And if he's going to hide behind the Israeli population, they need to be willing to say, sorry, but the population is also wrong about doing a genocide and an ethnic cleansing.
Go into Rafah, destroy the remaining Hamas terrorist battalions, make sure that we don't put into Gaza, instead of Hamas, the Palestinian Authority that educates their children towards terrorism and the annihilation of Israel, and also an enormous majority here, including 99 Knesset members to 9, oppose the idea of ramming down a Palestinian state down our throats.
I want to get to some of those polls.
So there's, of course, Hamas can't stay in power, but also the Palestinian Authority can't stay in power, and also there can never be a Palestinian state. Okay, you are not a partner for peace. That is the most obvious thing in the world, based on your own words. No Palestinian state, no Hamas, no Palestinian Authority. They're collaborators with the Israeli government, and the Israeli government goes, you're not collaborators enough. Well, what the fuck? This is why you have to impose peace on them. The U.S. needs to take a leading role and impose peace. Jesus Christ.
This is a wake-up call to Senator Schumer. The majority of Israelis support the policies of my government. It's not a fringe government. It represents the policies supported by the majority of the people. If Senator Schumer...
He's right that the Israeli public likes his policies vis-a-vis the war, but he's wrong that they like him. So that is a distinction that matters.
Opposes these policies, he's not opposing me. He's opposing the people of Israel.
Okay, I'm going to get to some of the polls that you cited in one moment, but I just...
He loves to do that. He loves to conflate any criticism of him as an individual with, you're just criticizing all of Israel, right? By the way, even if Netanyahu were to step down right now, the idea that whoever replaces him would be some sort of peacenik is nonsense. And that's also the trick that the U.S. is playing, right? Pin it all on the right-wing government of Netanyahu, and then whenever a new government comes into place, you can just pretend, oh, look, they're being more reasonable. If they reduce the genocide by 37%, look at, isn't this great? Nothing to see here. Like, that's also the goal here.
Make sure that our viewers understand that Chuck Schumer gave the big speech, but he has support in many ways from the President of the United States. President Biden is a self-described Zionist. Even he is starting to distance himself from the way you are handling the war. He called what Schumer said a good speech. He said that he shared the concern of many Americans. They aren't criticizing Israel. They're criticizing you and your right-wing coalition.
Dana, there's a fallacy that is being perpetrated here. And you should take polls, you'll have your own polls, and check whether the people of Israel support the policies that I'm being criticized for. That is, supporting the policies of going into Rafah, destroying a quarter of the remaining Hamas terrorist army. That's like leaving a quarter of the Nazi terrorist army in Germany and saying, no, we're not going to finish the last quarter, and we're not going into Berlin. Most Israelis, overwhelming.
They're not killing Hamas. 92% innocent civilian death rate. Don't fall for this dumbass head fake. Like, we're doing a highly targeted campaign against Hamas. My ass cheeks you are.
Support the position that we have to go in. They oppose the idea of ramming down a two-state solution or a terrorist state against their will because they think...
Again, here you have to be willing to say, if you're Dana Bash, okay, but you're wrong and the Israeli public is wrong. But she's unwilling to do that. Watch, you'll see.
This will endanger Israel's future. They support those policies that I'm putting forward. And to present that as something that is, I'm an outlier, it doesn't represent the majority of the people of Israel, is simply a fallacy. And I'll tell you the other fallacy is. They're saying, well, most Palestinians don't support the Hamas massacre. In fact, 85% of the Palestinians do support, unfortunately, the Hamas massacre. So they've got two fallacies here, and you can readily check.
So in other words, when polls of Palestinians show that they're angry, they want retribution, they want revenge, they want violence because they feel like peace hasn't worked, that is an indictment on all Palestinians. But when the polls of the Israeli public show the exact same thing, that's okay. Our illegal and offensive violence against civilians is good. Their illegal and offensive violence against civilians is bad. And by the way, some would argue it's defensive violence, but I don't think it ever is against civilians, to be clear. Can never be that, right? But look at the double standard. Oh my God.
The majority of Israelis support the policies that I have on prosecuting the war, which is what I'm being criticized for.
Well,
so it's not just me. It's the people of Israel who believe that we have to have this resolute victory to assure a future.
I think that what you're being criticized for is not prosecuting the war. It's the way that you're prosecuting the war. So I'm going to get to that in 1 minute. But I just want to add a little bit of sort of context to the way that the Biden administration is pushing back. Another way is that the U.S. intelligence community warned that, quote, distrust of Netanyahu's ability to rule has deepened and broadened across the public. And then back to the polls, you're talking about support for the idea of toppling Hamas. That makes perfect sense. There were other polls in Israel.
Does it? Doesn't make perfect sense. If you're getting 92% civilians in the process of trying to get Hamas, it doesn't. See, look, the problem with the CNN host, Dana Bash, is she concedes on many of the premises of what Netanyahu says, and she shouldn't do that. But of course, we're talking about CNN, and this is literally as tough as you're going to get it.
Major Israeli television stations that said what Israelis also support are early elections. That's what I really want to focus on here is Senator Schumer not calling to sort of topple the government, but specifically says when the war winds down, will you commit to calling new elections? That's my question. Will you?
Dana, 2/3, first of all, what you said is wrong. The vast majority of Israelis oppose early elections until the war doesn't end.
That I've seen polls that say they want him to step down right now. I don't think that's true unless he's got some biased ass poll that he's talking about.
Had many polls on that. Look, a lot of the polls are twisted.
Channel 12 says 64% of Israelis support early elections. But all polls show
that's not. No, I'm afraid that they asked them the question, do you support it during the war? And they said no.
But that's not what Schumer is calling for. He's calling for new elections when the war winds down.
Even with the kid gloves, he looks like he's getting wrecked.
Well, we'll see when we win the war. And until we win the war, I think Israelis understand that if we were to have elections now, before the war is won, resoundingly won, we would have at least 6 months of national paralysis, which means we would lose the war. If we don't win the war, we lose the war. And that would be not only a defeat for Israel, but a defeat for America, too, because our victory is your victory. We're fighting these barbarians that are not merely threatening the survival of Israel,
the war
but
winds down.
Everything that we hold dear together.
Will you commit to new elections when the war winds down?
I think that's something for the Israeli public to decide. But it's not something, look, that's something for the Israeli people to decide. I think it's ridiculous to talk about it. It's like after 9/11, after 9/11, you're in the midst of fighting the war against Al-Qaeda. And an Israeli would say, you know what we need now is either new elections in the U.S. or if your system doesn't allow, then President Bush should resign and we should.
That absolutely should have happened. Things would have been a zillion times better if that happened. Now, I don't know if it would be better in the case of Israel, because again, whoever would replace Netanyahu would probably be just as insane as he is. But, oh my God, are you kidding me? How much better it would have been? Well, if it's Dick Cheney replacing Bush, it wouldn't have been. It would have been just as bad, because I think Dick Cheney was making most of the decisions anyway. But if it was like Al Gore who got in it, woo, that'd be so much better. Oh my God.
An alternative leader. You don't do that.
Well, let's talk about why.
A sister democracy, to an ally. You don't talk about that. What you do talk about is how do we help you defeat what President Biden called sheer evil. You don't just stop after you destroyed 80% of sheer evil. You
right. I can't deal with this guy, man. I can't deal with this guy. This idea, you don't do that to a sister democracy. There was a story that came out years ago. Israel is spying on the U.S. They're spying on us. Netanyahu put a middle finger up to Obama and delivered a speech directly to Congress. You don't interfere in the politics of another nation. You do it to us all the time. AIPAC spends hundreds of millions of dollars influencing our politics and our policies. All the pearl clutching here. How dare you? Shut up. All right, I got one more for you here.
Mr. Prime Minister, I want to talk about why the sentiment has changed. I mean, obviously, there has been huge support and still is really big support here in the U.S. and most corners of the world for you doing what you are saying. Your strategic goal is to defeat Hamas and to
That is not at all true. It's just not. If you look at the votes at the UN, it is like overwhelmingly like, stop doing this.
Sure that that kind of terror attack doesn't happen again. But what is happening, and the reason why the world is shifting in public sentiment, is the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Organizations call what they are seeing near famine in Gaza. So why won't you allow more food trucks to drive through the border crossings into Gaza to feed starving civilians while you continue to take out the terrorists in Hamas?
Because he wants them to die. That's the actual answer. Because he wants them to die. That's why. He wants an ethnic cleansing and a genocide. That's the answer. He's not going to say that, but that's the real answer.
Well, our policy is to do exactly that. And in fact, we've enabled, well, our policy is to not to have famine, but to have the entry of humanitarian support as needed and as much as is needed. So we've created alternative routes, supply routes. We allow the dropping of the support from the air, humanitarian aid, a sea route that we've cooperated with, and it started yesterday, and alternative land routes that we're enabling again. The problem isn't getting the...
They're blocking over 70% of the aid trucks. And people are starving. They're eating grass to survive, weeds. They're drinking seawater to try not to go thirsty. They're extremely dehydrated. This is a lie. It's a lie. He's lying. Again, she's being relatively aggressive against him compared to how CNN normally is, but still it's so weak.
In. The problem is that once they're getting in, they're looted by Hamas or looted by gangs. And what we're seeing...
There are 30,000 Hamas members in Gaza. There's 2.3 million people, or at least there were, in Gaza. Oh, it's all being looted by Hamas. Absolute fucking nonsense.
What we're trying to do with some other powers is to try to get the aid to the actual civilians who need them and not looted by Hamas. That's really the problem.
Well,
in any case, that's our policy, and that's why I've enabled alternative routes of supply.
Okay. There's been a trickle, I mean, to be fair, of supply going in there. And every major NGO, outside organization involved with this crisis says that the level of hunger is life-threatening for hundreds of thousands. Cindy McCain, the McCain family, they have been long supporters of Israel. She is now the executive director of the World Food Program. She said that hunger has reached catastrophic levels in northern Gaza. People are dying. Only a fraction of the food needed is trickling. To prevent an outright famine, they need significant increase in humanitarian aid now. Millions of lives are at stake.
Based Cindy McCain? Based Cindy McCain. Shocking.
Will you do that? Will you commit to that?
Of course. And we're doing it. Again.
Lies. He's not doing it. Guys, their strategy at this point is just lie. Just go out there and say the exact opposite of what's true. And people are like, okay, well, he's doing it. No, he's not doing it. All the reporting says the exact fucking opposite. Oh, God. This guy he's flat out evil. He's flat out evil.
I've authorized alternative routes of supply. And again, the problem is not the number of trucks going in, although we're increasing it on a daily basis. I think the problem is preventing the looting by Hamas and by others. And that's what
They've blocked over 70% of the aid.
On now. I think it's a cooperative effort. Our policy is to enable humanitarian aid. That's been a constant element in our whole program. It's to destroy Hamas militarily, but also to supply the humanitarian aid simultaneously.
With respect, though, sir, it's not
happening. And the main
happening.
obstacle to that is actually Hamas.
It's not happening. Well, in the north, you said that you've destroyed Hamas. If Hamas isn't in the north, then how is Hamas taking away food? And if you open up more border crossings and give more food into the area, allow starving people to eat, the looting maybe would subside. That's human nature, no?
I'm actually shocked at how aggressive that question was from Dana Bash.
That's exactly what's happening, because we have increased the number of trucks entering the north. I think I'm up to date, and I know these numbers, and we know that there is an increase, but we also know that we have a job to do to prevent the looting, because at the end we bring in the trucks, including to the north, and then they're looted by remaining Hamas terrorists. We've destroyed
They're quote looted by people who are fucking starving and they need food. There have been a number of massacres of innocent civilians trying to get some goddamn flour to survive. God. War criminal. He should be behind bars. He should be behind bars until the day he dies.
Fighting formations of Hamas, the terrorist battalions, but they're still individual terrorists that we're mopping up.
And I
these
understand
individual terrorists shoot the drivers, take over the goods, and try to give it to Hamas fighters, the remaining Hamas fighters. So it's an ongoing battle.
It's all lies. 30,000 Hamas members out of 2.3 million people in Gaza. It's just all lies. He's just lying. This is a lie fest. This is stunning, the amount of times look, it's at the point now where it's like, why even have him on? I understand he's the prime minister of Israel. I understand he's the one who's directing all the policy. But if he's going to come on and just lie, even though Danabash is trying to do a half-decent job, it's like, what am I supposed to do with that? What am I supposed to do with that?
But it's something
but
that
you
we're
understand that
committed
it is
to.
the responsibility.
Destroying Hamas and giving humanitarian aid.
Forgive me. I understand that. Given the images that I'm sure you have seen, do you believe fundamentally that it is Israel's responsibility to make sure that those starving civilians, including those children, get food, and you're doing everything in your power to make sure that happens?
Categorically, yes. I think it's an effort that we're engaged in all the time. I think that
it's lie. It's just lies. It's just lies. Let's look at some of the comments. AIPAC extremely angry over this. It's not looting. People are rushing to get food. That's not looting. Where exactly did she press him? She just says, glad to hear him say that he does care that civilians do not die while tens of thousands already have. Lie. That person's 100% right. Did she even ask about the 30,000 Palestinians slaughtered or the 500,000 people on the verge of starvation? No pushback at all to this war criminal. Look, I mean, these people are right. You know, I thought she was more aggressive than I ever would have thought possible on CNN, but at the same time, it's still like a pittance of what actually needed to be done. This man should not be given a platform to spread his lies. He's using Hamas every time to dodge questions. Guys, YouTube comment sections are rarely ever totally freaking unified. But here we are. Lies. Israel is the occupying power and is responsible for ensuring the safety of the Gaza people. This war criminal needs to be imprisoned. I think that's supposed to say, period. This devil is a liar. If he is so safe, why don't CNN have reporters on the ground? This host is totally useless. All these softball questions to a war criminal. Why they always lie? Shouldn't this man be in prison? He should be arrested. I mean, God. They're right. They're right. So what you just saw was a colossal lie fest, and everybody needs to understand that. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop, and watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.